I'd like to call this meeting of Stanislaus Valley Fire and Rescue Group Board of Directors meeting for February 20th to order, and I would like everyone to follow me in pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Do we have a roll call, please?
Director Green, Director Woodbury,
Here.
Director Carnahan,
Present.
Director Phillips,
Here.
and Director Nixon.
Here. All right. Do we have any questions about, or we'll entertain a motion for February 15th minutes to be approved? Are there any corrections or additions?
I'll make a motion to approve. Second.
Okay. I have a motion and a second to approve the January 16th minutes from the board meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. This is the time for any public comment. It's an opportunity for the public to speak to the board of directors on any item not on the agenda. The maximum time for public comment will be 30 minutes, and 3 minutes will be allowed for each speaker. Do we have any public comment? Hearing none, we'll move on. Review of monthly finance.
Well, good evening, directors. I really don't have a great deal to report on the financials tonight. You have the balance sheet and the profit and loss and the budget versus actual in the board packet. Do you have any questions on any of those?
I noticed that the overtime,
Yes,
Was
we're going
quite
to
high.
address that.
okay, and I figured you were aware of that, but that's pretty high percentage.
It is. We should be at 58%, and actually I have it highlighted on my sheet here. And the overtime is at 97%. A good part of that dealt with the previous academies, and we have some of the contractual overtime that's going on. So we're taking actions to curtail that as much as we can. We'll still be running over on that, so we want to let the board know that we will be running over and be looking at a supplemental with that. We have two issues that occurred. One is the overtime, and then when Chief Langborg left with cashing out vacation and so forth, probably about another $25,000 there. So we may be looking at proposing a supplemental budget to transfer some funds from contingency. This will be at a later date. Could be up to $50,000 on that.
Okay.
I also wanted to mention there was some question about the PERS line item. I did some investigating on that, and it looks like it was in relationship to the overtime and the conflag wages. I also wanted to mention that Chris Marr will be here March 7th to the 8th to help me do the adjusting journal entries for the audit, and Kathy will be here the following week to work with me on just some basic reviews of the financials and to help me prepare for the upcoming budgets.
I read that. Thank you.
The final reimbursements for the seismic grant have been received. I've got some letters in the board packet that show that everything has been submitted and completed. And I am working on the SAFER grant next. So we're looking through all the paperwork on that, and we'll be submitting more reimbursements for the SAFER grant and getting the reports up to date.
I also noticed Shaving, Tire and Automotive. How do you pronounce that?
Insurance.
Evans. A couple of entries in here. Was that for a transmission?
We have transmission, and then multiple of the staff rigs have had things that have come up, leaks in differentials and axle leaks and things like that. Got bids from around town, and they were
They were the lowest.
Maybe those are tires.
tires and transmission.
Okay, we have the Dodge pickup that was sitting out at Station 7, and it's been out of service with the transmission issue since I got here. I said, let's get it fixed. We're not gonna be able to sell it in that kind of condition, and we actually have a use for it right now. So went out to get quotes on that, got that fixed, and then we had a couple of rescues actually needed tires. So we got quotes on those, and that was the best deal that we can get for the community.
Okay. I saw it there, and I read in your that you had a transmission issue with Rescue 102, or Utility 102.
Utility 102, Rescue 102.
Okay.
Regarding the overtime, was that due primarily because of calls that require?
We had to actually two things that occurred. One is the calls that required we were up on our calls. I believe a portion of that was a realignment on the SAFER grant, that we thought that some was charged to the grant and it actually wasn't. It needed to come into a regular line item. And then the other is the previous academy that was run had up a lot of overtime. So we made adjustments on that to get that way down, and making a couple other staff assignments to help keep the overtime down.
Any other questions? I just had one, this Chris Moore, for $6,600. Was that the bid that we had worked out with him for the audit?
That was a partial payment for the audit.
Okay, how much is the total audit?
I believe it's around 10,000. 10,000?
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if that was all of it or if that was just part of it. Okay. Any other questions? We need a motion to pay the bills of $145,052.45.
So moved. I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second to pay the bills, ratify the bills at $145,052.45. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? So moved. Staff reports, chief report.
The other report in front of you, the big thing is the chief director recruitment period did close on the January 31st. We had received 14 completed application packets. We did get pretty widespread coverage for the recruitment. The 14 applications, we had 3 from Oregon, 2 from Colorado, and 1 each from Arizona, Washington, West Virginia, New Hampshire, Utah, South Carolina, Missouri, California, and Maryland. So the advertisement was out there for anybody that was looking for a chief position. On February 5th, I met with both board presidents and reviewed the applications and select those to continue in the process. 5 candidates that we felt were best suited for the organizations were invited to continue in the assessment center and interview process. Of those, 2 from Oregon, 1 each from Washington, Colorado, and Maryland. And by the resumes, they all appear to be very qualified and appear to have a background that should help them to be successful here. Since then, 1 candidate has withdrawn. That left us with 4 that are continuing in the process starting on March 1. So the schedule you have on here, it shows on the 28th. It's a Thursday. All day is held for the candidates to travel in and visit, meet with me, staff, tour the community, tour the district, just to get familiar with what's going on here. And then that evening, 7 o'clock, meet and greet here. Again, all board members, community are invited to attend. It's an informal session where the candidates can introduce themselves and kind of mingle and ask questions. It's one of those cookies and punch type things. On Friday the 1st is an all-day assessment center testing. We currently have 19 assessors scheduled to evaluate the candidates on various dimensions, looking at different characteristics on job-related scenarios. Looking at 4 different scenarios in which the candidates will be evaluated. They've been notified on that. They have an ambulance board meeting. The assignment for their presentation has been provided to them. There's a mock community meeting. Assignments, again, they've been notified on that. An incident management scenario and an oral board. There'll be 2 different interviews. One is with the assessment center, the other is with the 2 boards. And the assessors are from the fire service, EMS, medical, hospital, city officials, other members of the community, so pretty widespread. In fact, Chief Turner will be participating on that process. And we'll have the city manager is involved, the hospital administrator, our medical program director, several of the other chiefs, chair, or I guess the manager for the chamber, Banner Bank, just a wide group of individuals coming in. Then on Saturday, on the 2nd, starting at 8:30, as for both boards, to interview the candidates. And that'll start off with about a half-hour briefing on where we're going, questions you can ask, things you can't ask, things of that nature to keep us all out of trouble. That'll start as an open meeting and then adjourn to executive session for the actual interviews and back to an open session for any decisions or any direction that you want to provide on that. I know there's questions on that process. We've been talking about dispatch, continue to work with Forest PD and dispatch to improve the levels of service. Chief House has been working directly with the dispatch center. And at the same time, we're doing some behind the scenes work in case we end up eventually in a year we need to move. But the first priority is to work with Forest PD to achieve reliable level of dispatch services. We did auction off, actually Rotary auctioned off a dinner here at the fire station, and we held that. 7 people came in. I don't know what they paid for the dinner. Came in, we actually had smoked tri-tip. There are 4 young ones, so there's some macaroni and cheese, casserole type thing. So they got a tour of the station, the apparatus. They got to knock down cones with the fire hose. I think we had a pretty good time. Our crews had a good time hosting that. Also working on our volunteer pay, meeting with our volunteer association officers to bring our pay practices in line with IRS and bowling. We used to be in great shape. We used a point system, but for some reason we moved to an hourly pay scale, and that has thrown us awry a bit. Not seriously, but we're readjusting to get us back in line. We did host the January meeting of the Southwestern Oregon Fire Chiefs here, which brought fire chiefs from down the Coos County area all the way up. It was a good way, again, to interact, network, and show off our organization. I'm also continuing to teach classes here in the district and for our neighbors. On February 13th to the 15th, we did the first 5 minutes class here for our career staff, some volunteers, and a couple of young medics were here. And also had some participation from Coos County departments, Coos Bay, North Bend, Sumner, Charleston, came up and participated, mostly to kind of evaluate what we're doing to do some similar types of training down in that area. And the last day on that, we had Chief Smith from Pleasant Hill Goshen here to assist in running some simulations and some discussions, but I think we're pretty valuable. We're doing that currently right now over in Mapleton, Swiss Home Deadwood. Was there last night, doing the first section. I'll be there tomorrow night, and then we'll finalize it on Saturday. And then starting in April, we'll be conducting an apparatus engineer course over 2 weekends here. And in keeping with the one team concept, we're hosting a combined fire and ambulance district awards event at the Driftwood Shores on Saturday evening, April 13. All board members are invited. We'll get formal invitations out. It is a 1920s speakeasy. So those who want to dress appropriately for the 1920s, please do. I understand that there may be some foul play, such as a murder, that will occur on there, and so we'll have a bit of whodunit as we're sequestered in the room until, because we don't want the police involved in that at all. Not that we're unscrupulous individuals, but hey, it is the 20s and it is a speakeasy, so I don't know if there's any questions or anything we have.
Okay. Well, just out of curiosity, the candidate who backed out, did they say what? Just out of curiosity.
Yes, it dealt with the housing market, and should the individual get the job in the area that he lives, the market isn't doing real well right now. And he and his wife discussed it and said, this isn't the right time. He was very interested, actually, he did travel here to visit with us. What was interesting is he pulled into the Cedar Beach RV park with his RV, and was checking in, and somehow the discussion got around the fire, and the manager said, you know, the fire chief lives here. You know, chief, and I could have saved him time if he would have brought a bottle of wine over to my place. I could have shared all sorts of stuff with him. No, it was supposed to use the housing market, as I understand it.
Okay. All right, operations chiefs report.
Thank you. For February of 2019, we had a pretty quiet month in January, only 39 calls, 3 of which overlapping. Compared to our upcoming months to that's relatively quiet for us now. The 2018 calls totaled out at 674, which before the year before, on 2017 was 495, so that's 158 more calls, so it's a pretty good increase. For January, we didn't have any fire loss, we did have 2 fires, but they were pretty minimal. Our average number of firefighters is maintaining around 11 on your multi-calls. We were running 11 for the year's total, and then last year we were down around 9, so we're getting better response on our multi-thing responses. Our times for our emergency calls is still in the 8.2 range. Kind of ran my percentages and numbers together, so that's a little hard to read. I apologize. I'm trying to streamline the report a little bit. Everything's looking right in line. Obviously, we're staying fairly high on fire, but the rescue and everything else is holding steady. In the analysis, everything's from Image Trend Elite System, which is the free system from the state. My report is generally prepared on the 1st of the month, and in some problems with the state reporting system, it took me all I could get done to get my report in time. So we're having some difficulties with the state reporting system. I think they're a little bit overwhelmed with the changeover. Training report, I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's a rather lengthy report. I wanted to give everybody a good state of the department. And in training, we were kind of shifting the training. We had direction before to get the fire academies done a little faster so we could bring more people in. We're switching that out and going back to a longer academy, a little more dedication on the front end, and that gives us a more stable and ready to respond firefighter. Our firefighters currently are able to respond, but they need a little more direct supervision, so we're bumping that up a little bit and getting, as they come out the door, a little more ready. In prevention, Captain Miller is gaining speed. He's adapting really well. Some of the system problems with his code pal system for reporting are giving him some fits, so we're making sure we work in tight with LCOG and make sure his computer system's up and he can get his information and reports out in a timely manner. Recruitment and retention, we're working towards having some plans in place that will actually address staffing numbers as well as a retention plan to keep some of the folks we're keeping. We're averaging, in the high 60s for maintaining, which is better than the national average, but it's really hard to put time into folks and then lose them soon after. You'll see in the staff report the solid numbers on that. Facilities, we've had a whole bunch going on at Station 1. We had a leak, and then we had some damage in one of the bathrooms that we thought was from the leak. Turned out it wasn't from the leak. It's the shower that was installed. The handicapped seat had a lot of water to get behind and got into the floor, so we had some pretty good rot. So that's an ongoing process. The HVAC units are currently working. We're still watching those. There's been some talk and desire to convert some of the training room day beds to not a full-time sleeping position, but a makeshift time, so we can get some volunteers that have been showing interest in standing watch for evening period.
Would that be down where the Murphy beds are?
That would be down in Murphy beds, kind of similar to the rolling walls like you'd have in a hospital setting or office setting. Station 2 needs some work. Station 3, we had some issues with the well that we got on top of. There's some recommendations there. 4 is the seismic upgrade. It's complete, but we have some degradation of the apron. That's concerning. We use that a lot for our drill grounds. I would love to have the drill grounds more central, so we're not all at the north end of the district if we're on a training night, but we're working around that. Station 5, the logging operations are really going. If anybody gets a chance to roll out there, it looks completely different behind Station 5 right now on Canary. Some of the gravel that we brought in for that project is starting to settle out. We're getting a lot of traffic on it. So I'll probably work with the logging company as well as our folks and get that stabilized out. We'll be looking to pave that once the logging's completed. I don't want to put any paving down, run big trucks over it till it's done. Station 6 is still Station 6. Way out there on Ada, it's not much fits in there, and it's been used for storing a couple things quickly and then moving them back out. Really working hard on Station 7 to get that kind of repurposed and get some of the non-serviceable and antiquated equipment on the surplus list. We've been pretty busy with a lot of other things, so it's not coming up yet. At Station 8, the volunteers recently took the task of repainting the office area. It looks really good out there. So if you see any of the guys from Station 8, that's Captain Madden's guys, give them thanks. Equipment, we're doing the flow testing and we're covering the SCBAs. I think our SCBAs were built on like a Friday or a Tuesday after a 3-day weekend. They are under maintenance right now, but we continue to find things over and over on them. It is going good. We did receive a grant in the past for those, so the likelihood of getting another grant to replace SCBAs at this time is pretty few and far between. On the upside of that, in the budget year, we're looking at the CO and 4 gas monitors. They're currently out of service, but we're trying to find the best way to get those replaced. Scott recently was purchased by 3M. Scott is a manufacturer of a lot of our equipment. When 3M bought them, they now have access to replacement batteries for the TIC, so we just extended the life on the thermal imagers by 4 or 5 years easily because we got all new batteries for them. Watching the radio and pager system close, we're looking at options to get the capabilities at a similar price. It's kind of the carry-on pager type radios that run dual band. It's a good option. It's cost effective now. The prices have come way down. And Motorola just bought out a bunch of the little guys, so it'll still have the big M on it. Apparatus, we have lots of them and they're starting to show their age. We have a really aggressive preventative maintenance system going, so we're staying on top of things and making sure that we have good quality things for our folks to run on. With the exception of the boat needs heavy hull maintenance. The boat is currently out of service. I don't want anybody operating in it. I've talked to the Coast Guard and they'll be responding out with their light fleet if we get something on one of the lakes right now. Again, I was talking about reporting. Western Lane had purchased their own elite site. I'm looking at developing our site onto their site so that there's fire reporting separate to the EMS, but we don't have the reporting problems with the state to run our reports. And then, as you can tell, there's an EMT class going right behind us. They're going along really good. I think we have 8 from SVFR in that class. So many of them are EMRs that just folded right into the EMT class, so they got a good heads up and a good run. Also attached are the staff reports. If you have any questions, you're welcome to field them now.
I was just going to say something about Station 6. You know, that building isn't ours. You know, we have it on basically, when
Progressive.
Davison's owned all that property, he said that we could use it. It's now owned by MDMG. And if we're not going to use it, I'm sure that the Grange would use it, you know, for storage. And then we wouldn't have liability or anything associated with it. That's a decision you guys would have to come back as a recommendation from us. The boat we got for nothing, other than we bought new motors, and radios, outfitted. But I don't know whether it would be worth putting money into that boat or not. You know, that's something that you have to make a recommendation.
My opinion currently on the boat, and I'm looking at options, that boat is essentially a U.S. Coast Guard fast attack for ship to ship. It's not a rescue boat, and it's not a firefighting boat. In fact, a rigid hull inflatable is probably the last thing you want to get even close to a fire with, unless you can swim really well. So I'm coming up with some recommendations for that. It's just boats are really expensive.
Well, and we may not have a boat.
Correct.
We don't have a boat now. and we're not able to respond. But that's something that you might take up with the new chief, huh?
You can. One of the things I looked at, Lake Fire Authority scored a really good deal on one of the 28-foot Coast Guard boats, quick boats, and I contacted for federal surplus, and just recently the Coast Guard is opting to sell them instead of going to other agencies. So we've made that inquiry on that.
Oh, good.
So we're trying to figure out what other options are there that may be better suited for our use here that are very cost effective. And what may be most cost effective is not having one as well. As you
It
mentioned.
might be. That's a decision that has to be made. The other thing is, I noticed when you said something about a Humvee in here.
That was also free.
It's on loan too.
Yep.
I mean, it has to go back to state forestry when we're done with it.
Do those have to go back, or after a certain period of time that we get title?
They come every year and make sure that we still have the equipment, then we
Okay.
sell it out from underneath.
So,
It does,
have we ever used it?
it's been used on 2 actual incidents, otherwise it sits. It's out of Station 3 currently right now up on North Fork, so that we don't have to take the engine every time we go somewhere.
Okay, well, that's something you have to look at too, because, you know, we can send it back to the state forestry. It doesn't cost us any money, and I'm sure that we're not paying a whole lot for insurance on it.
It would save us the insurance cost, but as we do the preventive maintenance with the fluid samples, I don't know how a Humvee doesn't go anywhere. It has to have the transmission fluid changed every time. It must have been a military Humvee. It's just used to get its fluid changed all the time.
Anyhow, those are some things to think about. That's, you know, I don't want to get into operations, but that's just,
They're all options that I'm looking at. It's just trying to balance out what we're working on right now.
okay. Marvin,
Just
you have
a-
something?
Just a point of order, if you do decide to send the boat back, the motors we own and can surplus. The motors don't have to go back with it. The original motors have already been returned to them, and so when they expect the boat back, they'll expect it with no motors, so you can recover a little money there.
Yeah, and those are very nice motors.
Yeah. Not very many hours on.
175 horse, yeah. Okay,
Could I add a couple of things to the report?
absolutely.
One, since I said the emails hadn't gone out to everybody, I want to talk just a little bit about the one team that we're working on right now. Really came to a head a couple of weeks ago. We had a fire call at Green Tree, and which is not too far from the medics. And I'm listening on the radios heading down that direction. I hear Medic 5 is on scene, single wide mobile home, nothing showing. Medic 5 will be investigating. I'm going, holy cow. You know, we're getting the size ups and so forth. They started thinking back on the Arago fire. The medics came from a different direction. They actually located the closest hydrant that was kind of back in the bushes and everything on another street and gave us that direction. On the fire we had on Maina Loop, they were there helping assist with the fire hydrant. They were moving some vehicles out of the way and actively involved in really showing the community that we are operating as one team. And I kind of got away from the working together for our community. We're doing more than working together for our community. We are actually operating as one team out there on both medical calls, rescue calls, fire calls, within our responsibilities, the equipment and training that we have. So I wanted to point out that cooperation and working together is really, really moving ahead. And I'm seeing it more on the fire side because that's usually my interaction on scenes with them, as well as we are on the motor vehicle accidents. We've been doing the 5-minute classes here. The one we did in-house, we had a couple of medics attending that. Have 2 of them over at the Swiss Home Deadwood class. We're talking about doing size up motor vehicle accidents, things of that nature, so we're able to actually get their viewpoints as well as we go through this. So we're really emphasizing that one team, that we really are operating together seamlessly across the 2 agencies. The other, as Chief Dickerson pointed out, a little bit on the academies. Before we were going for the entry-level firefighter 3-week academy. And you could recognize those individuals by their black helmets. According to OROSHA, they can operate on a fire scene if they're under direct supervision of a firefighter 1 or above. And it doesn't do us a whole lot of good. We have very well-meaning individuals, but we're very limited on what we can do with the people. And it's my opinion that when someone steps off the fire engine, they really need to be able to go to work and not trying to sort out who's a black hat and who's a yellow hat. And the other we found is we've been missing the hazmat awareness operations portion in the academies, which means those people should not even be going to anything that involves any type of a hazardous material. So I basically gave the directive, we did our last ELF Academy, ELF being for the entry-level firefighter. And according to our SAFER grant, we will be doing Firefighter 1 academies to come back into compliance there. And our individuals are going to have the hazmat training before they jump on a fire engine and go out. So that's, you'll see in one of the reports that we lost like half the sign-up list because the academy went from 3 weekends, it says to 2.5 months. It's not 40-hour weeks in every weekend. I mean, we're skipping time in between. And quite frankly, I look at it if individuals are saying, I don't want to do it anymore because I have to do a few more weekends, I'd rather know that up front than have to invest all the dollars into that. So I think we're going to end up with a group of dedicated individuals, better trained individuals. Also, our training officer and operations chief have been working very diligently with our current, I hate to use the term ELF, entry-level firefighters getting task books done, training done and completed to get them up to Firefighter 1 as quickly as possible. So we're rectifying that. And we have the hazmat classes scheduled, so we'll be in pretty decent shape. We just had to change some direction.
Any questions? I was watching the news and I know that the Senate's having a big deal on harassment right now. What do we do for harassment training?
Actually, I think all they have is the target solutions that they go through and signing off. It's something that needs to occur down here on workplace violence, hostile work environment, and so forth.
Right.
They're told, everybody is told, we aren't dealing or working with any hazing, harassment, or any of that type of stuff. So.
In reference to that, there's a policy and a policy sign-off that everyone has to complete. Now, obviously, firefighters are firefighters. If I could click to the sign, like sign. But we are doing training and we are building that into the academies. There's a day for
That's
that.
good. So that there is an actual training on it, and that is, I think you have to be able to document that and show, you know, in case something does happen. We have done everything that we can. You've done everything you can, and yes, it may still happen.
You know, what I found in the situations I've been involved in, and this is where we're letting people know that it's all done in fun. However, it's all fun and games until it's not.
That's right.
And so we just don't even go there. Don't even go there.
Okay. Anything else, Chief Deputy? Office manager report.
A couple weeks ago, I attended a webinar with WHA, and which is our insurance agent, and special districts regarding the projected health insurance increases. They're looking at 5 options, ranging from staying with our current carrier with no changes at an 11.7% increase, to changing over to various carriers, a different carrier for health, a different carrier for dental, and so on, at a 5% increase. There's arguments for staying with the current carrier, and they include consistency and less impact or change to the members. But there are districts who are in favor of changing to various carriers just to save any money possible, because the 5% is much better than the 11.7%. And there's a lot of displeasure with the insurance companies as they continue to raise rates. But they should have more information distributed to the districts, and the final decision will be made by the end of February. Regarding payroll, last month there were no errors with the fire department and only one programming error with Western Lane, and that was on the ADP. And we have been still charged for a component that we don't need, which is called HR Assist, and I tried to cancel it in November, but we continue to be charged for it. But I sent a letter of correspondence to the ADP management, and we were actually involved with a conference call with them yesterday. So that has been, those HR Assist fees have been discontinued, and we will be getting a $759 refund. In your packet is information for the upcoming special election on May 21. The directors at the end of their term, as of June 30th, include Director Phillips, Carnahan, and Woodbury. So 3 positions are open. If you care to run for another term, the information is in the packet, and you need to have your name and the form, it's Form SEI 190, and a $10 fee into Lane County elections by March 15th, I believe. Middle of March.
March 21st is.
March 21st, thank you. Regarding human resources, we continue to update new hire paperwork and processing. And on the IT end of things, we're working with Charter Spectrum to upgrade internet services for this station, as well as stations 2, 4, and 8. And I'm also looking into getting all of the directors' SVFR.org email addresses, because as we learn in the board training, going to these special districts conferences, they really point out the importance of having district email addresses just to protect your personal, for your personal protection. We can always, once these email addresses are established, we can always give you instructions on forwarding them to your personal email if you so choose to. Right. So more information will be coming available as we move forward with that. And I mentioned the SDAO conference I attended, and it was very good. The keynote speaker was speaking about cybersecurity, which is really a major concern. We learned about phishing and vishing being voice scams, people getting on the phone saying that they're somebody who they're not, and getting personal information. And I've included in your packet a handout from that guest speaker, because it was not only from a personal standpoint or from a business standpoint, for all of us personally, it's very important. So please take a look at that and protect yourself with good passphrases. They're actually recommending passphrases instead of passwords now. I also attended a lot of different classes while I was there. Public employees due process rights and discipline and discharge. I attended the caucus for the fire districts. There was a segment on public meetings overview and executive sessions. I also included a handout in your packet. I attended priority planning and overview of payroll and related rules. So it was a very good conference. That's all I have.
Any questions?
I was just gonna say, since I changed my password to Zimbabwean Prince, I had no problems. Thanks for the password.
Okay, next on the agenda is budget committee members.
Yes.
Who's expiring with you?
There is one position open, and that was Cindy Russell's seat.
Okay.
So we have 3 applications to fill one position.
Okay. And has she expressed whether she wants to do it again or not?
She said this would be the last year of her term,
Okay.
and she has other obligations.
Okay. Thank you. Did you look at the applications here? Okay. Joe Marks is, I know him just through church, but he's a really involved guy. I know that. I don't know this other person at all.
I met the retired fire marshal, can't remember his name, and I can't remember Leslie. He stopped at the shop, seemed like a nice personable guy, got some fire experience. Seemed eager and anxious to help,
Okay.
but this was like a 10-minute conversation I had with him in the parking lot, so.
I know Joel a bit as well, just because of the paper,
Mm-hmm.
those sorts of things. I do like well, the last two, I know this, Christopher came in sort of a little bit under the wire. But I liked, what I did like about his and the other gentleman was, both of them have some fire experience, not that they need that for the budget committee, but in terms of understanding the logistics of the finances and especially the retired fire marshal. That kind of stood out to me just because of the familiarity they have with the kinds of things and purchases and budgeting, because it's not like just a normal business.
Do you know where he's retired fire marshal from?
It was in California somewhere.
Redwood City.
Redwood City?
Redwood City.
So you've had conversations with him?
I have.
Okay. Okay.
Did he also come down and volunteer for something else? Did he?
He's been involved in doing a lot. In fact, he'll be one of our assessors for the assessment center process as
Okay,
well.
that was it. So he was telling me about that.
I'm open to the nomination.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to move, just nominate someone.
I'd like to nominate Christopher Counts. It's the gentleman who's the retired fire marshal. I'm
That's-
sorry, no, wrong one, I'm sorry.
That's Jim Alisi. Alisi's the retired.
There we go, Alicia. He's a retired fire marshal.
Yeah, well, that's not the name.
Yeah, I would second that.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor, and a second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So I guess that,
I will contact
the
all
contact-
three. I will let Mr. Polisi know that he has been appointed to the budget committee. We also have 2 positions open on the Western Lane Ambulance Budget Committee, and advertisements will be coming out soon in the paper. We have applications out, and I will let the 2 who did not get appointed know that there are opportunities there if they would like to apply for that as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, IGA committee recommendation for third entry. Kennedy. I would assume that you would give us that report.
I'm going to give a little report on that, if it's okay. So thanks, I'm coming to you tonight as the chair of that committee. And as you might recall, we have 2 members from each board on the IGA committee, Ron Green and Director Hickson from Siuslaw, and Western Lane is myself and Larry Farnsworth. So I'm going to look at a few notes here because I want to make sure I cover everything. This is kind of an update, but it's going to be, definitely an open discussion if you have questions on this, because we do have a recommendation from the committee that will be coming to both boards, hopefully really soon. We met a week ago on the 13th to consider a proposal of creating a third entity that would take the overall management and leadership for both boards, basically combining the administration that we have now into a third entity. And this model is currently was followed by Lane Fire Authority and is currently also in place at Pleasant Hill and Goshen Fire Districts. And Chief Nye came over a week ago and talked to us from Lane Fire about their experience with this kind of a board setup of bringing 2 districts together and creating the third entity. And Ned, I'm hoping you'll help me out here whenever you feel the need, just chime right in. But I think their board ran for 4.5 years with this model and ended up consolidating. The Pleasant Hill Goshen Fire District still operates, my understanding, under this model of bringing 2 districts together. And the purpose of the concept is to provide equal representation from both boards as it relates to the fire and EMS and the administrative staff. It doesn't affect any of the line staff or the volunteers of either district. So the third entity would be a separate non-tax district. It would be a municipal entity, but wouldn't have any taxing, no revenue authority, and would be governed the way both these districts did before. Is they had a 4-person board, 2 members from each of the, it would be 2 from Siuslaw Valley Fire and 2 from Western Lane that would sit on this board. And and take action. If there was a tie vote, because you have 4 members, it's possible. I think they said at Lane Fire, they never in the 4.5 years had this situation, but it could come up. If there was a tie vote, that decision would go to both full boards to make the decision. And that's written into their agreement as a board. And also, at least at Lane Fire, and I think both of them, they meet, all 3 boards meet concurrently at the same time. So you have the Western Lane, Sayusla Fire, and then 2 members from each also representing the 3rd entity. We'd be meeting at the same time. And the one thing that's kind of nice, I think we got a little smile from Dina, because that means there's only 12 meetings a year for all 3 districts. You're meeting at the same time.
And one of the pluses of that too, when we were talking about it, was that you have everybody in the room at the same time, so that you're not spending time discussing something here and then waiting for the next meeting, and by the time it gets to that meeting, maybe some things were forgotten, whereas everyone together, it truly is a complete representation of both entities together under one.
The other element with that is the transparency.
Yeah.
That anything that one board is saying it's in front of everybody. So you have full transparency.
And in the likely event there's a 2-2 vote, it goes to the full boards that are there. So you can make a decision in the room at the time. If this is approved, what's envisioned is the fire and EMS chief would report directly to this board, and the administrative staff, which we have 4 people, 3.5 FTE, and also the 2 division chiefs would also be considered to be employed by this new entity. So we'd be moving those expenses into this new entity, along with some materials and services. And we have Dina kind of drew up a sample, and I want to note it's a sample that, you know, an example of how this might look from a budget perspective. We'll pass out here in a minute. And then it would be funded by each of the Sayusla Valley, and also Western Lane would fund this new entity via line item transfers in their budget. So it wouldn't have its own revenue, it would be funded from the 2 entities. One thing you'll see in here, and we'll go over it too, the question was how much, you know, is there an added cost? And there would be some incremental added cost there'd be a 3rd audit, and there would be some insurance costs, and I think maybe a little bit of legal. You know, you're looking at probably between $15,000 and $20,000 that would be incremental new expenses in running this new district, but it's not very significant, because you're really just taking expenses that are already spent in the 2 current districts and moving them into a 3rd body. So what this accomplishes really is that both boards would have equal input and authority over fire and EMS, and I think I want to emphasize that the chief would be reporting to this new entity, which would have 2 representatives from each board. So there'd be equal input to the chief from this new entity. It establishes a foundation if you want to consolidate services further and pay for them from the 2 districts, you could move them into this entity. So there's the opportunity to do that. And not lastly, but another thing is if some other entities wanted to contract for those services, it creates this 3rd entity that could, maybe Mapleton, Swiss Home, or Deadwood, would want to move some of their administrative functions, have a contract for it instead of carry on in their own districts. That could be a function of this 3rd district as well.
Two of the things that were important, and there's 3 really, but 2 of the main ones was the concern that Western Lane Ambulance had in terms of equal representation under the IGA and decision making. And so by creating a 3rd entity, you know, you've got the 2 representatives from both, and then ultimately if there's a tie, it goes back to both boards. So by having all the joint meetings together, by having 2 representatives from both sides as the 3rd entity, there is guaranteed equal representation from both fire and ambulance part. And the other part of it was trying to think ahead in terms of, as we, you know, say 5-10 years down the road, as much as we're starting to work with our upriver neighbors, Mapleton, Swiss Home, Deadwood, with our training, sharing some grants, those kinds of things, at some point, you know, as we work towards this one team goal, it may behoove them to say, hey, you know, we want to, it's too much for us to handle the administrative part from what we're doing. We want to become part of that third entity as well, which would be very easy to do that, which they would pay their cost for that, and we'd be sharing all those resources together.
Thank you, that's great. That good recap there. So there's also some transparency, because right now the budget's kind of buried in your budget. You know, what everybody's paying for is kind of, it's all in your budget as far as the administration. This would pull it out, and it would make it very transparent about what's being covered and who's in the administrative function. The boards, we're asking, and I think, has everybody been polled for the March 7th meeting yet? We're looking at.
Send out initial information on that.
Okay.
And we would actually need to get that noticed.
Right.
Which we haven't yet.
So we're looking at March 7th. I don't know if you all knew that, as maybe a special meeting of both boards together jointly to discuss this. The reason it's moving pretty quickly is that if we want to get it up and running for the next fiscal year, which would start July 1, they're going to have a budget, just like both districts have a budget, and this is the time when we're going to start that budgeting process. So if we were going to form it for the next fiscal year, we need to kind of get moving and get it ready so that staff will have time to pull the budget pieces together for that third entity. And you have to create the entity and come up with a name. It's not it takes some work. It's going to take a little bit of work. It's going to take some time ahead of time to do this. So I'd like to especially thank the staff for pulling all this information together in a short period of time. It's been really good information and helpful. What I'll pass out to you now to take a quick look at is, and let me walk you through this a little bit, because there's probably more numbers on there than you need to focus on to start with. And again, this is a sample. This would put the fire chief and both of the division chiefs and the 3.5 administrative staff into that column that's called the proposed 2019-2020, that first column of dollars. That's what the payroll costs would be, and you can see it totals up to about $853,000. Those dollars already exist in our budgets, and they would just be pulled into this new entity. And then there's a sample of the materials and services that are currently shared that could be moved to the budget as well, that total $51,000 down below. The yellow line items would be incremental new costs. The other costs in here are pulled from the existing budgets of the two districts. And you can see on the materials and services section, you can see what SVFR's remaining administrative budget would be for materials and services, and what Western Lanes would be, and a total for all districts combined. So things like line number 28, where it goes to billing services, that's the kind of thing you want to probably leave with Western Lane, because we are the only ones that bill for services, and that $50,000 cost should stay with Western Lane. Does that make sense? So you can see it's blank across the administrative and also the SVFR budget, but it's a big line item for us. Well, we wouldn't put that in the shared budget because that's only expense of Western Lane. So there's some expenses in here. It's kind of a startup. It would be kind of a startup affair, but that's the idea, is the shared costs would be moved into this entity. So, initial reaction, questions?
Huge step,
Yeah.
way too big. I think we have to have public input, we have to have public meetings open to this, because this is a big, big step.
It's a big step.
So we probably need to schedule that and do that. I think it's too big for us to do rush, and we should never rush into anything. So we probably ought to at least find out what the public thinks about it.
Right.
Personally, that's just my opinion.
I'm a little uncomfortable with the speed that it's moving
Yes.
also.
That's just my opinion.
Okay. So the next meeting that was scheduled, of course, would be a public meeting, just like this is a public meeting.
Well, we want it publicized so that the public has the opportunity to voice their opinion one way or another.
Sure. Other thoughts?
I know that Chief and I, talking, it might be helpful to have him, I don't know if he'd be willing to talk to us or to be at the meeting on the 7th.
I can check with him, see if he's available.
One of the things he pointed out was that the creating the third entity itself is relatively simple.
Yeah,
It's
right.
really just there's no legal, it's not like creating a district. It's particularly in Oregon, it's very simple. But it's just a matter of trying to find a way to make this work in a way that's simple to understand in terms of where the money's going. We want to make sure that that's all transparent, that we see where the money's being spent. And the other part is trying to prepare for the future and anticipate what we may need as opposed to trying to do it on the fly later. So I understand it's a big step. It's one more step in the process of trying to simplify this intergovernmental agreement that we have and make sure that everyone's represented. Everyone has, financially it makes sense, and that we are taking advantage of the one team that we're doing, that we're working towards here in terms of medical, fire, all under
I think
one.
there's a couple of things that are important on this. And again, the boards will decide what you want to do. You already have an IGA that says that we're sharing and we're working together. Really, the only change this does is gives a budget to that entity and basically strengthens the IGA, so now both districts have equal say in the administration, as opposed to right now Western Lane. The only relationship between your chief that you're hiring and Western Lane is through that IGA, and we were real clear that there was some concern about that. So all this does really is strengthen the intergovernmental agreement. The third entity is only a creation of an ORS 190 intergovernmental agreement. That's all that is. And gives you some budgetary authority in there. It also, as you move forward, it gives you a foundation should we decide to add any more services into that. It looks at the futurity of your present decisions. And as we continue to move closer and closer together on the admin, on our servers, our phone systems, on a lot of our operation, it brings us in now to one budgetary item. So I understand the concern is moving ahead on that. I don't see it as really a big step because you already have the intergovernmental agreement. What you're doing is you're providing some financing towards that and establishing that whatever employees you decide, this would not affect any line operations. It would be totally transparent to the community. There's really no change to the community or services that are provided, but really brings it together to a equal basis on admin for both agencies.
Is your recommendation to move ahead without getting public?
Well, you can get public input. It'd be the same public input that you received on the IGA. Because really what you're doing now is saying on the IGA, instead of, again, you're not a taxing district. This is not a taxing district. You're saying is we will transfer, assume that it is $50,000. And assume for a minute it's $25,000 for each district. I don't know what the percentage is. Each district has a line item transfer to this budget to manage it for, actually, take it back, $904,000 is looking only at the M&S. That you end up, whatever that share is, goes in, and then that's managed out of that one budget. Other than that, it doesn't affect any of the union employees. It doesn't affect really anything operationally. It's an administrative function.
The IGA was contract with Western Lane for Sayusville Valley Fire and Rescue to manage their, and this would change it from managing it to creating an own entity, separate from the fire department, separate from the ambulance district.
Yes, but governed by both.
But it would be separate from both.
Correct.
So it's equal input then.
That's a huge step.
Okay.
That's a huge step. And I don't, personally, I don't think we should rush into it. And if we don't get it this year, maybe we can work on it for next year. But the point is that I want to make is that it's no longer a contract for management. It would be a new entity, and Sayusville Valley and Western Lane would be basically out of it, and that entity would run it.
No, it's governed by Saginaw Valley and Westerland. So they're not out of it. They are the governing body of that.
See, I don't see it that way. I'm sorry, but I don't see it that way. Right now, Saginaw Valley Fire and Rescue manages, through a contract, Western Lane Ambulance District.
Right.
And that's the way it's written right now.
You could have current management for the next budget year, pretend like it's a third entity, run a budget, even though the monies are being paid out of each individual budget, they could say, hey, if we had one budget, this is what it would have looked like. Like say, rushing into something is never a good idea. They could, next year, they could come to you and say, okay, you know, if we would have been one, this is what our budget would have looked like, this is what we spent, this is what we learned in the last year, and, you know, we still think it's a great idea. It's not really gonna change anything. I mean, rushing into things is never a good idea.
And, you know, right now, we're in the middle of trying to hire a fire chief and an EMS manager. I don't think we've had any issues so far, and I don't know as we will, in hiring that person. But I heard this, the whole incident was from one individual on your board that wanted some input and wanted to be able to tell the chief. I want that correct.
Well, it was more than one, for sure. There were two
Well, I was
that
at that
voted.
meeting. I
There were
listened
two
to
that
it.
voted against it. So, and there were other, in fact, the motion came from a third to go back to the IGA committee and look for a way to resolve that.
Okay.
So it's an issue on the other board for sure.
Okay.
And it's, you know, this is tried and true in a couple other districts that are combining in the area. And, you know, one thing I guess we could look into, and I don't know the answer to this, but can you start a district in the middle of the year? So if you have a process, maybe it goes a little longer to get more public comment, get comfortable, but you could start it in the middle of the fiscal year.
You could, because it's in supplemental budgets, because you're gonna be switching line items around.
Yeah.
It's cleanest to do that as of July 1.
Yeah, plan it in the initial budget process. So you have to do a supplemental budget from it. So that was a unanimous proposal from the IGA. What I'll do too is, and again, that's good input, we want to get, you know, everybody's feedback, and it's kind of a quick comment section there, but it does provide, you know, some of the accomplishments that are listed at the bottom. So that's basically a recap of the same thing that was presented, and you've got the budget there. Okay, any other questions, comments? Because we can have that other session and probably talk about it further with both full boards. This isn't meant for action tonight, but to give you the concept of what came out of the committee, which we try and communicate back to the boards. And we'll do the same thing with the board on the 28th with Western Lane. Same presentation.
I just kind of want to give you the information that we have on why we came up with that proposal, and then hopefully on the 7th, if we can all meet, that we can get both boards together. Because I'm sure, you know, Dick Childs was at the meeting that we had with this, and he had some, it was the first time I saw him actually seem like, oh, yeah, okay, I get this, I like this, because he's been very standoffish about that, understandably. So it'd be good to get both boards together once you had a chance to propose it at the 28th. We talked about it tonight, and then on the 7th, we could have a full joint board meeting, talk about it, answer questions.
Just on this. Yep. Be a special meeting. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thanks.
Next thing was Florence Urban Renewal Agency. Did everybody get a chance to read that? I guess they gave, sounds like they were just letting us know where our tax dollars went. Okay, next thing on the agenda is the opportunity for directors to comment on any topics that are not on the agenda. Anything? Anything? Correspondence? I don't think we have any correspondence. Okay, next board meeting will be March 20th. Other than the special meeting, which would be the 7th, at what time?
5:30, I think we've got it scheduled.
Actually, you have a meeting on March 2nd for interviews.
Right.
That's a special meeting, that'll go into executive session.
Maybe March 7th.
March 2nd, is that, that's a Saturday, correct?
Correct.
Yes, at 8:30.
I can copy all of you in on email when I send out the public notice.
Okay, thank you. Hearing nothing else, we'll adjourn. We don't need an executive session for anything. Okay. Adjourn.